The man, the myth, the legend. Oh, I can't hear you.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, we're good.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, you're good, man.
I just want to make sure everything works this time.
Dude, trust me, we're gonna triple check this. Hey composer, it's Zach Heyde. This is a video I've been trying to make with Mattia for the past month or so, but we keep screwing up the tech stuff. Our cameras keep crapping out or something always goes wrong. And something went wrong on this one too, but it's okay because we actually got something out in the first place. So I hope you enjoy a little kind of unscripted chat of us talking about orchestration, our creative processes, procrastination, and a bunch of other topics. As always, if you do enjoy, please do leave a like at the end. It really helps us out. Be sure to check out Mattia's channel. He has amazing content, and subscribe to both of our channels because it makes us happy. I think everybody's different with this, but like I tend to like really short deadlines because I don't have enough time to like second guess my decisions. You know?
I tend to procrastinate quite a bit.
But don't you think maybe that part of that is like if you just have too much time to do it in the first place?
Maybe, but I don't know. I've always been a master procrastinator. And
what did you do, like in between, like when you would procrastinate?
I was just worrying.
just sitting there and worrying.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes procrastination could be good because it kind of makes you. I don't know. Maybe it's part of the process, right? Maybe you think you're procrastinating, but you are actually kind of. Growing an idea inside of your head or something.
Oh yeah. You just reminded me of a friend of mine in college, and we had this running joke. He was a composer too, and we would always say, "I'm conceptualizing." So we'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go conceptualize," and we'd go and take a nap. Yeah. Like we'd go and sleep. But I think there's some truth to it though, because you're right. Unless you just tell ourselves that, but like sometimes it's like it just has to like, what's the word? Gestate? Like just sit there.
Yeah.
And then when you come back to it, you have like a fresh perspective on it. I think there's truth to that. For sure, especially with like orchestration for me, I found that really true.
I mean, I think I don't know. Everybody's process is different, but like to me, if I have, I mean, maybe orchestration is a little bit less subjective. Depends on what people give you. Mm-hmm. If you have to do something that is specific, can be a little bit more mechanical and methodical, So, and I don't think that there is as much creativity involved as there would be if you were to be composing something, because that's like composing something is literally creating something new. Mm-hmm. And if you got nothing to create, like if you have no ideas, literally nothing to start with, it's going to be tricky. And it doesn't matter how long you spend, how much time you spend thinking about it or trying to make something out of nowhere. It's probably gonna be no good.
It's funny that you say orchestration is like objective, because I agree with you, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily feel that way in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the process, right? Like it depends on how somebody writes. Mm-hmm. For the type of music I do, which is like the orchestration tends to be linked to the composition. They really do go together. You can't like that project, for example, we did together. When you were doing the piano parts, you were already thinking about the orchestration because of the parts that I gave you, the sketch that I gave you. And of course you can there's things that you can do and you can be creative with it, but at the very same time, if that's if you are writing already thinking with the thinking about the orchestration and having the orchestration in mind, it's inevitable then once you move to the orchestration, that's going to be like a very natural part of the process because it's inside of the composition. And if you change it, you kind of break the composition.
Do you think that when people say that they struggle with orchestration, what they're really saying is they struggle with arranging? to a degree?
I think when people struggle with the orchestration is because they don't have a process, and they kind of think they don't see the bigger picture, as composition and orchestration and arranging and everything coming together with a single art form.
Yeah.
I don't think they struggle with orchestration precisely, not specifically. They probably struggle with the whole kind of process because they don't really understand it, or what it means to write an orchestral piece. It depends on the type of music you do as well, right? Because if you're doing stuff like more modern kind of stuff, it doesn't matter, right? If you're doing that, ostinato thingy with a billion different layers and all that Zimmery kind of sound, doesn't matter. The orchestration could be drastically different.
Mm-hmm.
But for the kind of stuff we do, like a more traditional kind of approach to composition is, it's just part of the process. It's just quite literally composition and orchestration and arranging and everything we talked about are quite literally the same thing.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of it's like trying to orchestrate before you compose. At least for me, is almost like trying to like color a painting before you've actually drawn it in the first place. Like it's like you need a framework. Like the framework contextualizes the color that happens, because when it's a tree, naturally you're going to know what colors are associated with the tree. But if there wasn't a tree there to begin with, how would you know to use those colors? So it's like, because I find that my process, I used to try and write, like I would just try and do orchestral things because I had a big template with orchestral stuff. And then now my process is much more about like trying to really connect with the musical ideas first, and then determining like what orchestral instruments would work best for it. Like, I hear the staccato passage. It's like, well, that's probably going to be strings or winds. Which quality do I want it to feel like? I want it to feel like, cutesy or woodsy. Maybe I'll use winds. And then like, so the decision making is like from the starting point, as opposed to like, let me use some staccato winds and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree. I used to be very specific. I find myself now that I don't really need to be as specific as I used to be anymore, because I kind of, after some time, you do this, you kind of get an internalized sense of what the orchestration should be. But I used to be very specific in the sketch, as like, just figuring out all the voicings and not changing them, just all the registers, and just, if I play a melody in a specific kind of register, I know it's going to be staying there, and that will limit my choices when I'm orchestrating the piece, because for that specific register, only, a set combination of instruments will work. And if I have a high line on, like on the top of the keyboard, it's probably going to be flutes or piccolo. It's never going to be cellos.
Right.
And people do that all the time.
That's such a good point.
Things around.
It's I don't remember what video I was watching, but he was saying that like orchestration is primarily just register and weight, I think he said was the other one. Like the weight of the instrument. In other words, like as but a clarinet playing the same melody as a flute is going to obviously have a lot more presence to it, because it's a lot higher up in the clarinet's register than a flute would be.
Yeah, I think in those terms too, I kind of take hints from my playing as well. If I play something that is a little bit more lyrical, it's probably going to be woodwinds, maybe,
Oh, that's interesting, like the way you actually play it.
That can be subjective as well, though, because, it's taking hints from a piano which has a very different kind of timbre, right? Like it has a decay.
Yeah.
It's not like a flute. No, I mean, no, that's not a good example. It's not like a string instrument that they could hold a note forever.
Right. Well, that's probably part of it too. Like people who are trying to get from piano to orchestra, you don't necessarily want to play like you're writing a piece for piano. It's more like using the piano as like a sketch pad, and like voicings transfer slightly differently. Like sometimes you can make it work, but overall, like the voicings are different from instrument section to section, you know.
That's so interesting that you say this, because having learned the piano by studying composition, you know, I was studying composition and learning the piano both at the same time. So I never really studied the piano as an instrument. I'm not very good at playing the piano as a pianist. I kind of see the orchestra, and I'm not very good at making a piano part. But I can kind of sort of play with you know, voicings, you know, that would be more idiomatic for the orchestra, for example, than they would be for a piano.
Yeah, but that's the idea anyway. Right. That's, I guess, some of the basic principles of like voicings go from instrument to instrument, like, you know, keeping lower registers spaced out more, but they play differently, and like, and their sweet spots are always different from section to section. So it's ultimately like knowing you can't just be like low instrument, give to low instrument, you know, like there's certain things that I guess you learn as you go. And I know we talked about this the last 3 times we tried recording the video, but what's your process like when you're studying something that you find helps you best internalize the thing that you learned?
I mean, like, I've learned, just as we said, I've learned from transcribing. I'm self-taught, you know. When I decided that I wanted to learn, that I was interested in composition, I just bought a bunch of scores, you know, John Williams, probably, can't remember exactly which ones, and the keyboard, and started to transcribe, you know, and try to figure it out by ear. And it took me some time, obviously, to kind of start building, you know, a good vocabulary of you know, phrases and things that I could, you know, apply to my own music. But then eventually, when I did start to compose my own music, I was still kind of replicating what I was hearing at the time. And I kind of made that my own practice routine, sort of. At the end of each transcription, I would, you know, try to make an impression of the piece I transcribed, and try to learn to reuse some of the devices that, you know, I learned. But yeah, it took me some time to be able to, you know, figure out a way that that made the music sound, you know, that still made it sound like it was my own, and didn't necessarily make it sound like I was copying somebody else. It all comes down to the quantity of the work you do. With time, you know, with time, just the more transcriptions you do, the more it kind of becomes natural, because you start mixing all these elements together, and it's not just taking from one single source, which is the most important part, really. Otherwise, it's going to be very noticeable, because the people will know that you're paying an homage to that specific, you know, piece you're trying to emulate.
Right. That's like, I find, I'm kind of curious if it's the same for you. Like, when I was first getting really interested in orchestration, I was doing searches like on forums on like, you know, I'm interested in writing film music. What scores would you recommend? And there would be this list of scores, and it was always like The Planets, the New World Symphony.
Yeah.
I feel like Shostakovich 5 was in there. Just a bunch, like Price on Rachmaninoff, a bunch of pieces. And I would buy the score. And in the beginning, what I was doing was I felt very overwhelmed, because I felt like I needed to internalize like everything about all these scores. And I would also get bored, because there would be pieces in the scores that, like, if I'm being totally honest, like just didn't engage with me. Like I couldn't bridge the gap between the music I was hearing and the music that I wrote. And so I felt like, for me personally, like my approach is kind of different now. And I'm curious if it's the same for you, where it's not like I'm studying a piece of rep because it's like standard rep and I feel like I should know it to be a good orchestrator, but it's more like if there's a specific moment in the piece that I'm listening to that strikes me and I feel like could be useful for me, then I pay more attention to it and try and internalize that and it could be as specific as like 2 measures as opposed to like an entire movement. So like, is your process the same or different?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. I only ever transcribed the things that I liked.
Yeah.
I never ever, sat down and tried to. I mean, it's kind of pointless, isn't it? Like, if there's something I don't like, I already know I will not reuse it because it's not my own kind of taste. And that's the whole point of transcription. I'm a very practical kind of person. If I'm doing something, I want to make sure I can get something out of it, and it's not a waste. Even like I love studying and reading, and just because I'm a nerd, let's face it. But
no.
but yeah, I don't like the idea of studying just for the sake of it.
Yes. Yeah. So I was going to ask you on that point. This is a bit personal as it relates to my studying practice, but like, how long would you spend? How disciplined were you when you did that kind of studying? Like, was this something you committed to yourself? I'm going to do this every day. I mean, every week. Was it more of a like when I feel like it? And then when you did those studies, how long a stretch do you feel like each one was?
I went through some long phases, man. Like, I mean, I didn't go to music school, so I kind of had to figure it out from the start. So I think it took me a good couple of years of quite literally only studying.
Wow. Daily, did you say?
Kind of, because I was back in the day. I was doing a degree in guitar performance, so I would do my whatever guitar practice thingy, and then I would do my composition routine. So I was doing it kind of daily. But then even past that phase, I would have some phases of, if I wasn't busy working or whatever, if I had time or if I felt like it, I would just even spend an entire month working on a single piece, just bit by bit. Like I was trying to get as close as I can, like transcribing in Sibelius, bar by bar, and try to get the dynamics right and to get the articulations right, that kind of detail.
Dang.
Because I think it's important. It's part of the idiom of the orchestral writing, and I don't have I'm not a very academic kind of person, you know me, and I'm not like into academia at all. But I think that is an important part of the process, because it's the way the music, this kind of music was born, right? So it kind of came with it, and just to look past it, it's like overlooking a huge part of the process and a huge part of what makes the music what it is, even right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, and I feel like, I think people would be sort of comforted to hear you say that you spent so much time doing it, because I think sometimes people want shortcuts a little bit. I feel that way too sometimes. I remember when I went to a classical music festival, and I was asking somebody, one of the panelists, like, how to improve on orchestration, and he asked me what I was doing, which was similar to what you were doing, and I told him, and he was like, that sounds like you're doing all the right things. And I was so annoyed by that answer, because I guess I really wanted, I don't know, I thought there would be some magic bullet or something.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's not. It's just time and patience and practice. And I totally agree with what you're saying about, like, it is a bit of a weird thing where it's like kind of quantity is actually really important in that case, because if you spend too much time with one thing, it's not really as effective as spending a shorter amount of time on a lot of things, because you can just have some variety and just sort of compare, you know? Because that's where you see patterns, right? I guess you can't see patterns unless you see multiple pieces. And after a while, you're like, oh, the brass always does this,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it is just like anything else, just like any other skill, it is something that you have to keep practicing, or you kind of lose it. I mean, I'm a bit rusty at the moment, to be honest.
I
because
don't believe that.
No. It's true. I mean, I'm not making this up. Like, it's been a while since I've, kind of studied, like, properly, like doing something, just spending some serious time on a transcription, or just, I mean, I guess I've done some work, some studies for my YouTube stuff, for my orchestration technique series, but it's not even close to what I used to do back in the day. And I think
you still, like, I don't formally score study as much as I used to either, but I also compose a lot more than I used to as well. So I find sometimes, I guess there are sort of different, there's like different pros and cons to both. You sort of seem to need a balance. Like, the con I find for me is, like, when I'm in the middle of a project, I don't have as much time to internalize new information. And that's also the time when I would benefit the most from it. Like, I'm doing something right now. Well, I can probably say, because by the time this video comes out, it'll be done. But it's basically like it's a Nightmare Before Christmas parody.
Oh,
so
cool.
It's really cool. And so they want, like, basically like Danny Elfman inspired music for this parody.
That's awesome.
Which is really fun. Super fun. But it's really hard. Like, it's really tough. It's not, I like Danny Elfman's music, but I don't listen I don't listen to his music that much. So, like, what I tend to do, my process of studying is way different than it being like a formal practice. It tends to be more like on walks or drives in the car, I'll listen to the soundtrack. And same thing, when there's little bits and pieces, I'm like, oh, that would be a great little tool to borrow. It'll just be like a little 2-second thing. And then I'm like, that's going to find its way to my music somehow.
Yeah. I mean, kind of depends on the style of music, right? Like, if you're doing something relatively simple, it's kind of easier to get away with a little bit of listening and just trying to steal a couple of ideas and put it here and there and just kind of mask it into your own kind of thing. But then if you have to do something that is really, it's much more sophisticated, you kind of need to spend time with it. Like, I was asked from my publisher to do like a Frank Sinatra kind of thing. I mean, like, I couldn't do that. It's not something that you can figure it out in like 3 days to meet the brief. And you have to be, I think on those kind of occasions, you have to be honest about it and just do the best you can. And then maybe they're going to roll with it. But to do an authentic kind of impression of Frank Sinatra in 3 days, if you have no idea of how that kind of music works, and it's very difficult to get resources as well, scores and kind of things, and just be certain, but then again, like, who cares about being authentic?
Well, that's the other thing I was going to ask, because I kind of go back and forth on this. Do you feel that maybe, like, oh, this is like so trippy. Do you think that maybe, like, it's the lack of being able to authenticate something that sort of makes you sound like you? That it's like your weaknesses are just as much a part of your voice as your strengths? Like, the fact that I can't write like Danny Elfman, but maybe get kind of close, like 70%. Maybe that 30% isn't that I just suck as a composer, but it's just the 30% is me.
Yeah.
Maybe I just suck and it's just that's what it is, but...
No, I mean, what's the point, though, of doing something that sounds entirely like somebody else?
Yeah.
But I guess it all comes down to the essence of the music and what it is that makes it sound the way it does. Because if you define Danny Elfman with pizzicato strings and celeste and, maybe low woodwinds and minor tonalities and whatever that can be, that's just like a minimal part of what that guy is and what that guy composes.
True.
So you could still do all that, take all the, how do you say? Take all the boxes and not sound like him, because eventually who's writing the music is you.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Right. So you're just, and maybe that's even better in a way, because that's I think, like, the John Powell philosophy, which is like, if you're inspired by something, you got to find something else totally different that also inspires you, because as long as you're putting two things together that have very little in common with each other, you're going to wind up with something that sounds unique. And I find that philosophy is way more like calming for my psyche, because it's like I don't have to come up with something new. I just have to embrace a unique set of influences. And that's, for me, I wind up liking my music a lot more when I'm just like, let me make something that sort of like embraces like Snarky Puppy and, I don't know, Shostakovich. Then it's going to sound unique,
Dude, I mean, like, that's what makes people unique, I think. It's not just that one influence, it's the whole journey.
Mm-hmm.
Really.
Yeah. And it's like, I think we talked about musical genetics, right? Like the idea that like everybody has a unique pool of influences. It's almost like your family tree. So like that's why you're a different composer without even trying, just because you have different influences.
Kind of. I mean, it like not just influence, what you want to say as well, because everybody leads different lives.
Yeah.
And eventually music is supposed to transcend, right? Like, it's not just supposed to be music.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's supposed to represent something else.
I'm curious, because I've always really struggled to figure out like what I want to say. I find that way harder than like just telling a story through music. I feel personally like I'm not, like, I feel like I'm like, what do you call that? A wolf in sheep's clothing. That I'm not.
I don't know what that means.
It's like an expression like you're hiding among other people, but you're not like them. That like I feel like I have much more of a business brain than like an artist's brain, because I see music in a very, I obviously get emotionally affected by music, but I see them as tools, and I see it in a much more practical way. Like, I want to evoke this thing, instead of like the more artistic approach of like, but does this speak my soul?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, that's a bit hippie, but
okay, I'm glad you said that, because that's how I feel too. I'm like, I don't really care. I mean, I get to write music and get paid. I'm happy.
But I mean, like, specifically media music, I think it depends on the type of music. Like, if you're doing pop music, could I don't know, you could describe a feeling through the lyrics, through whatever. Media music, it's a very different type of genre, because you are supposed to describe something else, not necessarily describe yourself. You're supposed to describe like a product or a mood, oftentimes.
True, and ego can get in the way, actually, I guess, in that case, as opposed to being like an aid. It actually can make you stick out too far.
No, there's no specific description of what the sound of a specific mood is.
Yeah.
Yet again, every composer is able to write for that specific mood in different ways, and the audience is still able to understand what you're trying to communicate. So that's what I was trying to say before, in terms of, what your life experiences are, and things like this would describe you, would, define you, give you that specific kind of sound as an artist.
So it's almost like, assuming that you have the technical skills to execute what you want, it's almost like your value or your uniqueness is how you respond to the story. Like what areas of the story you kind of zone in on. Because like I know that like Zimmer, for example, like I can think of, I think it was Interstellar. He saw Interstellar as he didn't see it as a space movie. He saw it as like a father-child movie, father-daughter. And I think it related to his relationship with his child too. But it's like, because it's like that philosophy almost is what made his score more unique. It's not like, oh, he writes space music different. It's more like he sees it as a different kind of story.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't know, man. It's such a personal kind of process. It's different for everybody. It's very difficult. I think we're kind of venturing into a very difficult kind of topic.
Yeah. Well, because you know what it is? It's that because we're talking about orchestration or like composing, and then we're also talking about like film or media composing, and they're like similar but actually really different skill sets in a lot of ways, because like my experience, it's one thing to just write music, especially with orchestration too, right? Like it's one thing to just be like, oh, you know, I know I'm going to do this here, and it makes sense for, this seems like a brass passage, so you throw a trumpet on it, and then you put it against the movie and you're like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Even if it works for the music, because there's this extra layer of like, what does that evoke in the story, and is that the right moment? And like, I think that's really, really challenging to figure out how to balance everything. Like for me, what I've started to realize is it almost doesn't matter what the music's, like the music can get away with a lot of different changes underneath a picture, as long as the orchestration is supporting the what's happening on screen. Like you can shift the orchestration, keep the same piece of music, and just adjust the orchestration, like heroic moment, so push a trumpet, or somber moment, so push strings. And so in that way, you're not trying to balance so many things at once, and you're not like Mickey Mousing with music, but rather you're getting a piece of music and using different colors at different times to like enhance the on-screen mood.
It's super tricky, man. Like doing stuff to picture. I don't do a lot of stuff to picture, but it's super tricky because there are so many different things to take into consideration. Like you have to play all the cliches, but at the same time, not too much. And because otherwise it's going to be boring and unauthentic. And then you have to pay attention to the frequency spectrums as well, you know, like sound effects and the dialogue. You know, if you put something right on the top of, you know, the voice register on an important kind of dialogue scene, you're just going to just ruin it right away. Doesn't matter what the music is or the mood is, and yeah, it's super tricky to get it right.
It's more like a Rorschach test for me, I find, where like my process is the composition process gets pushed back a little bit. Like I don't write like John Williams when I'm doing media music, because it's just really hard to find the balance between those two. And like it's so much more of an intuitive process, I find, where it's just like I just don't know until I put it against the picture and watch it, and then I'm like, you know, that was, I don't know, using a tuba was way funnier than using a bass trombone, and I couldn't even tell you why. Maybe if I thought about it, I could pull some reason for it, but it's just funnier. And it's like weird how that is. And it's very difficult to anticipate, I find. So it's like there's no formalized process. But then on the flip side, when you release a score or when you study a score, everything seems perfect and brilliant and in line, and you're just like, oh, what a brilliant choice they made. And it's you know, it's just because you don't see that part of the process.
Plus, you don't know what they do. You don't know, they might pull down stuff they don't work.
Yeah, or they're on the scoring stage and they're like, that actually didn't work at all. Can we try that with? Yeah, it's true.
That's the thing.
It's really interesting. I think it's again another one of those things where you just don't. You just have to do it a bunch of times before you know, and not assume that you're just gonna have the answer. Like, oh, dude, like this Nightmare Before Christmas one I'm doing. The first draft was so bad that I unsent it for the person I was working with. It was just like so bad. I don't know how to explain it. It was like I was like, what the hell am I doing?
Scary.
It was just genuinely like awful. And then the second one was
I bet it wasn't, but I get that.
Well, more it's like scary. I guess like it's not that the music was bad. It just didn't work, I guess, you know.
I mean,
to the picture. I mean, you don't know because you didn't see it, but like it's like I just had the wrong focus. And the thing that sucks, and I think this is true of like any kind of music writing, whether it's picture or not, is that you don't really. I feel like you figure it all out. Like the light bulb goes off, like at the 80% mark. You're like 80% through the project, and you're like, oh, That's what I'm supposed to be doing.
I mean, that goes. I think that's the same for all kinds of music, though, because after a while, you kind of you know your piece, right?
Yeah.
Like you're getting, I don't know. Let's say you spend a week through it, you're getting to know your piece and the language, and you're getting to know what you want. Eventually, what you want to communicate with it. So that's why I think it gets easier.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it's just inevitable that it would be that way.
You know what I try to do, like before I even think about writing a piece, I kind of sit with it, and experiment, with a whole bunch of ideas and try some things out, and just I might do that for a few hours. Then eventually, when I have to write a piece, it's much easier because I already know the piece. It's just a matter of organizing the information in a more kind of structured kind of form that makes sense for everybody, not just myself.
And that is such a good way to do it. And I'm so bad at that because I'm really impulsive with music. And I tend to have the tendency when I'm like, I get a brief, to just start writing. But you're so right that if you just take a second and just think for a couple minutes and just even just watching the picture a couple times, it really makes a big difference. Because how can you possibly, otherwise you make these surface level decisions, like you're scoring the picture and the first thing that happens is the character falls and you're like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. But you don't even know why they fell or the context. And, it's like you have to really you're so right. You have to take a step back and process the information before you start throwing stuff out there.
I mean, even away from the piano, I think that kind of clears my mind a bit. Sometimes it's just go for a walk or something.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, how you actually do that.
Grab my phone and sing some stuff into it. Everybody looks at you like you're a lunatic or something, but who cares? And just, then when you come back, you have a whole, all sorts of, ideas that of course you eventually have to write something because that's still not writing the piece, but it's not like starting from a blank kind of screen, which is super intimidating, and then you start inputting a whole bunch of things that don't really make any logical kind of sense and don't match with the thing, and just sounds bad. I mean, maybe it doesn't sound bad, but it just doesn't match with what you're trying to accomplish.
And I think too, what's maybe challenging, and maybe where I struggle with it more, is that when you're working for somebody, like for their project, there's always the possibility they're going to just reject everything you put out. And so it's almost like there's two philosophies. You could either just be non-committal to a lot of things early so that you don't waste time, or you could really sit and formulate something, and maybe the result of that would be a lot stronger than a lot of just kind of improvised. You know what I mean? Like I think Thomas Newman says that he'll send, I don't know if he still does CDs because most people don't get CDs anymore, but
like a floppy disk.
Right? Yeah. So a floppy disk sends the whole computer over, but it'll just be filled with 30 different tracks of variations of just random things, and that the directors will say, oh, I really like the dulcimer here and this chord over here, and so you build a language off of all the stuff,
Yeah, but you would have to have somebody on the other hand, and to be who's able to look past that initial stage of being just ideas and just being able to see past them and how they could be, what else they could be in the end.
Yes.
Because otherwise it's just I mean, I've tried a bunch of stuff like this, just send out the sketch before I even bother orchestrating it and doing the mockup. It just doesn't work most of the time.
Yeah, because it's hard for people to have that imagination.
Yeah, they don't have that kind of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But it depends. Like if you have somebody, maybe like a collaborator you have been working with for some time, that could see past that. That could potentially be very, a very, very productive way of working, I think.
This is one of my questions actually. How do you manage conversations with people who you're struggling like creatively? Like, I guess that's kind of a vague question, but like, do you have an approach that you found works for like how to resolve those situations, creative conflict? Quit.
Man, you ask very difficult questions.
Sorry.
I don't necessarily have an approach, like a specific kind of approach, but there will always be some sort of clash. That doesn't have to be a fight. And I used to get very hurt by it. And I've learned to not attach myself too much to the music I produce, because that makes it infinitely easier eventually when I have to make changes, because eventually you're just providing a service for somebody. It depends obviously on the type of service, because if you're just composing and your name will be on it in the end, you wanna just, you wanna be proud of what you produce, but I don't know, it's still their movie, it's still their, animation or video game or
Right.
whatever the project is. So, what?
Hey, dude. Hey, sorry to pause.
Oh,
No.
what's up?
Didn't work.
No, what's happening, man?
I hit the wrong button, bro.
No.
Oh my god!
You got the Zoom one, though.
That.
You got the Zoom one.
Yeah, I do have the Zoom one. I just hit the start recording. Oh, I'm such an idiot, dude. I hit the start virtual camera, not the start recording. I don't know why I thought to check.
You can stop and check it.
Let me call you back in 5 minutes after it processes. If that's cool.
All right, cool.
Okay, I'm so sorry, dude. I'll be back.
Fine, that's
All right.
fine, man.
I'll be back.
Cool.
I'm gonna go beat up a wall. See ya.